I was a little torn at first about making lecture videos for this class. I want you to know that it's important for me that you interact with literature on your own terms first. I don't want my readings to overshadow yours. However, I do want to share what my, quote, trained eyes see in some of these readings. So for this week, I asked you to read three old white dudes talking about how and why you should read. They have their differences and also some shared assumptions. I love this stuff and could easily spend the entire semester just reading about issues like canonicity, how the literary canon is developed, or how to approach literature as a critic, but we won't do that. However, we will keep coming back to these issues as you practice the different sorts of approaches. J. Hillis Miller and Harold Bloom both taught at Yale and were part of a group of critics known as the Yale School. They're both kind of coming into their own as critics in response to a type of criticism that's dominant in the 1950s and beyond called New Criticism, which you can learn more about on page 167 of Gardner's book. They also aligned themselves and were influenced by the emerging critical field of deconstruction and not with cultural studies or some other emerging critical perspectives. The main difference between the two of them is that Miller is more willing and more interested in looking at literature sort of through a sociological lens. He's interested in how changing society impacts literature, although he isn't coming from an explicitly feminist or cultural studies position. This particular reading has a Marxist slant, in my opinion, because one of the issues most pressing to Miller is really access. For him, literacy is a prerequisite for literature and also the means of production for printed material, i.e. the printing press. He's also interested in how literature can be used as a vehicle for indoctrination by the state or presumably by other social institutions. But completely on the other end of the spectrum from his interest in these social issues that impact reading, he is maybe most interested in what he calls the secular magic of reading. He says, quote, that the relation between reader and story read is like a love affair. These two positions for Miller are paradoxical. He claims that the birth of criticism is the death of literature. Yet, when I read him, he seems to think that both are important. The reading where a person can get completely lost in the magic of the text, and the critical reading. One is pleasure and one is work, and even though they can't exist together, they are both completely necessary. This feels a little bit like deconstruction light, since he's working here to have two antithetical concepts marry happily. You might respond to this kind of suggestion or not. If not, Bloom is much more didactic. Harold Bloom is perhaps the most famous literary critic of our time. He's somewhat of a public intellectual, and he's a prolific critic. His most famous critical work is called The Anxiety of Influence, and it was published in 1973. In that work, he argues that all new works of literature, capital L, owe a debt to all of and must struggle with the influence of all the great works that came before them. He's very interested in this lineage and in great books and in the canon in general. As you can probably tell, he believes in greatness and that there are works that are separate from the mass of printed material which are worth reading. And these are the works that people must read in order to be real readers. He suggests that to read the right way, you must, quote, clear your mind of academic cant. He's not interested in the type of criticism that dominates academic life now, which is mainly cultural studies and historicism, which you can also read about in your book. He believes that you should read rigorous material with an open mind for the purpose of bettering yourself. These positions are controversial, to say the least. I tend to be more interested in the type of reading that Miller is a proponent of, although I do agree with things from Bloom. Approaching a story with an open mind is important to all these critics. However, allowing yourself to form a critical perspective is also important. We learn different things from different approaches. I also shudder a little bit at the idea that we have found everything that is great throughout time and that we shouldn't think about the sociocultural forces that may have prevented us from discovering something in the history of texts. I recognize that throughout our history we have held prejudices that have caused us to overlook many writers and to continue to do so that could contribute to a reader's greater understanding of the world. Then finally we have Nabokov, who is a little bit like Bloom, but seems like he would be more fun at a cocktail party. Nabokov isn't primarily a critic. He's a novelist, most famous for his book Lolita. If you haven't read Lolita and you're studying lit, I would recommend it, despite its controversial content. Um, Nabokov is singular when it comes to the use of the English language, and it's not even his native language. It's incredible. I use this particular essay in English 102 classes, and the most controversial claim is always that he thinks that over-identification is a weak reading. Nabokov, too, wants us to be overtaken by the imaginative world of a good book, well-written book, but not because we relate to it, but because we also have a great imagination and some sort of aesthetic sense. He puts a lot of onus on the reader to be a critical reader and to take a critical approach to a text, although not a critical approach in terms of having an agenda. I also want to make sure that you see Gardner this week as a practical guide to academic reading. She makes some incredibly useful suggestions about how to approach a text for this class. I especially like the idea that questions should always form the basis for your writing about literature. You always want to start from a place of genuine inquiry and with the understanding that there is no one correct reading. I'll reinforce this over and over throughout the semester. In the end, I hope that the readings from this week leave you with both questions and answers. All of the readings enforce the idea that reading is work, even when it is pleasurable. If you want to interact sufficiently with a text or to grow as a reader, you're going to have to work for it, whether it's through rereading or using a dictionary or doing research or just paying close attention to language and construction and not just hoping to be swept away by a good story. The reading should also leave you to answer some questions about yourself as a reader. Do you care more about how the story is constructed and the message the author intended, or do you care more about the social, cultural influences that make the text what it is? Do you believe that some books are more worthwhile than others? How do you think we should determine which are the worthwhile ones? Have we done a good job of determining that so far? So despite the attack that Bloom and others see happening on the canon, our universities are still very much teaching canonical literature. In this class, we'll be playing with that a little bit, reading things that are traditionally taught in survey classes and things that aren't, and seeing how we can apply different critical lenses to both. And what we will definitely be doing is questioning. So I hope you enjoy doing that. I'm going to talk to you soon. Have a great week.